The desert wind carried the smell of dust and gunpowder across the border town of Nogales, Arizona. Under the fading sun, a convoy of unmarked SUVs waited in silence. Inside, agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, watched through tinted glass as a young man loaded crates of semi-automatic rifles into a pickup truck headed south. None of them moved to stop him. None of them were supposed to. The operation was working as planned, or so they thought. Operation Fast and Furious had begun with a bold idea: to track illegal gun sales and dismantle the powerful Mexican drug cartels by following their weapons back to the source. But in practice, it was chaos wrapped in secrecy. Agents were told to stand down as thousands of firearms crossed into Mexico, trusting that somehow, those same guns would lead them to the men who had plunged the border into bloodshed. What they didn't know was that this plan would turn into one of the biggest law enforcement scandals in modern U.S. history, and that American guns would soon be found beside the bodies of both cartel victims and U.S. agents. In 2009, Phoenix, Arizona had become a hub for illegal gun trafficking. Straw purchasers, middlemen with clean records, were buying weapons in bulk, often AK-47s, Barrett .50 caliber rifles, and AR-15 variants. The buyers were young, nervous, but heavily funded. They'd walk into gun stores with cash and walk out with arsenals. ATF agents, watching from across parking lots, were ordered to let them go. Inside the Phoenix ATF office, Special Agent John Dodson couldn't shake the unease. The plan sounded insane. "We're letting criminals walk away with guns?" he asked during a meeting. His supervisor, looking tired, rubbed his temples. "It's strategy, Dodson. We're tracking the supply chain. You'll see results soon." But weeks turned into months, and the results never came. Only more weapons disappearing into Mexico. By early 2010, the numbers were staggering. Over 2,000 guns had been sold under the operation's watch, and nearly all were unaccounted for. They started resurfacing in horrifying ways, at cartel shootouts, drug raids, and mass killings across Mexico. In one scene, Mexican authorities found over a dozen AK-47s at a ranch near Ciudad Juarez. Ballistic traces linked several to purchases in Phoenix. The ATF's gunwalking experiment had officially crossed the line from risky to catastrophic. In Washington, the Department of Justice had been briefed, but seemed detached. Paper trails and internal memos described the operation as a high-level strategy to penetrate trafficking networks. But on the ground, agents felt abandoned. Many had joined law enforcement to stop crime, not enable it. The moral weight was crushing. Dodson later wrote in his report, "We were told to let the guns walk. We were ordered to let them go." Then, everything collapsed on a cold December night in 2010. U.S. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry and his team were tracking a group of armed bandits in a rugged canyon near Rio Rico, Arizona. Shots rang out in the dark. When the gunfire stopped, Terry was down, fatally wounded. Nearby, 2 AK-47-style rifles were recovered. Serial numbers showed they were part of Operation Fast and Furious. News of Terry's death hit Washington like a grenade. What was meant to be a controlled operation had directly armed the men who killed an American agent. The ATF scrambled to contain the fallout. Reports were buried, evidence was under review, and officials at the Department of Justice denied knowing the full extent of the operation. But inside the agency, the silence broke. Dodson and a few others couldn't live with the guilt. They went to Congress. The whistleblowers' testimonies painted a devastating picture. ATF agents admitted that supervisors pressured them to keep the operation going, even as guns turned up at crime scenes. One agent testified, "Every time we let a gun walk, we felt like we were signing someone's death warrant." Senators demanded answers. The media swarmed. Gunwalking became a national scandal. Attorney General Eric Holder was soon called to testify before Congress. Lawmakers grilled him over documents, emails, and chain-of-command failures. Holder denied authorizing the operation, insisting he'd only learned about its full scope later. Still, the damage was done. The Department of Justice was accused of cover-ups, and for the first time in decades, the U.S. government was forced to admit it had lost control of its own weapons program. As the hearings unfolded, the numbers grew more haunting. Of the roughly 2,000 firearms involved, only about 700 were ever recovered. The rest vanished, likely buried in cartel stockpiles or scattered across Mexico's battlefields. Mexican officials were furious. To them, the U.S. had unleashed death into their streets. One investigator in Mexico City put it bluntly, "You call it an operation, we call it betrayal." Inside the ATF, morale collapsed. Agents transferred out or resigned. Dodson faced backlash for speaking up, accused of undermining his own agency. But public opinion was shifting. Americans wanted accountability. Families of cartel victims held press conferences, holding photos of loved ones killed by guns traced back to the operation. The border, already a symbol of tension, now stood as a graveyard of unintended consequences. In the months that followed, investigative journalists dug deeper. Leaked memos revealed that high-ranking officials were briefed on Fast and Furious far earlier than they admitted. Internal emails showed concerns raised by agents that were ignored or dismissed. One read simply, "We're losing control." Another warned, "Someone's going to die." That email was dated months before Brian Terry's death. By 2012, congressional hearings had turned into televised confrontations. Representative Darrell Issa, leading the oversight investigation, accused the Justice Department of obstruction. "This wasn't a mistake," he said. "It was negligence at the highest level." The Justice Department's internal watchdog later confirmed widespread mismanagement, poor communication, and reckless disregard for safety protocols. Meanwhile, in Mexico, the guns kept showing up. A massive raid in Sinaloa recovered several rifles stamped with the same serial batches. One of them was used in a massacre that left more than a dozen dead. Each discovery reignited the anger. To many Mexicans, the scandal was proof that the U.S. government's war on drugs had blurred into hypocrisy. Even within Washington, the scandal had ripple effects. Relations between the ATF and the FBI strained. The White House faced mounting pressure as election season loomed. Political commentators called it the new Iran-Contra, a self-inflicted wound that questioned America's moral authority abroad. In private, many agents who once defended the operation were haunted by guilt. One recalled visiting Terry's gravesite and whispering an apology. Another admitted he couldn't sleep after learning that a gun he let walk was used in a child's murder across the border. The operation had left scars far deeper than policy failures. It had broken the people who believed they were protecting their country. Years later, remnants of the scandal still lingered. Congressional reports labeled Operation Fast and Furious a reckless strategy with deadly consequences. The ATF tightened its internal controls, but trust was gone. For the families of victims, justice felt hollow. The Mexican government continued to recover weapons tied to the program for years after it was officially shut down. The most chilling realization came when one analyst summarized the outcome. "We armed the enemy to learn how they fight." That single sentence captured the absurdity of it all. The mission's logic, to let criminals buy guns to catch bigger criminals, had imploded, leaving a trail of blood and politics. Today, the phrase "Fast and Furious" no longer just refers to cars and speed. It's shorthand for government overreach, failed oversight, and the heavy price of secrecy. Every recovered rifle, every empty casing in the desert, tells the same story. A plan born of ambition, consumed by arrogance, and ended in tragedy. As the sun sets over the borderlands, the wind still howls through the canyons where Brian Terry fell. Somewhere in the distance, another gun echoes, a reminder that once those weapons crossed the line, they were never truly gone. And the haunting truth remains. The U.S. government didn't just lose control of the guns, it lost control of the line between justice and disaster.